The grand ballroom of the Atherton Hotel glittered a universe of champagne flutes and hushed million-dollar deals. At its center was Elrich Rowan, CEO of Titan Industries, a man who radiated success. Tonight he was set to announce the biggest merger of his career. But the real announcement, the one that would shatter the polished veneer of this opulent world, was poised on his lips. As he stood on the stage, a triumphant arm around his young, beautiful companion, he had no idea that his meticulously crafted empire was about to implode. Because across the room, watching from the shadows, was his ex-wife, Rosalie Marchmont. And she didn't just own his past, she owned the very ground he was standing on. The invitation had arrived a month prior, a thick cream-colored cardstock with embossed silver lettering that felt as weighty as the decision it carried. The annual Titan Industries Starlight Gala. It proclaimed a night to celebrate a decade of innovation and to look forward to a future of limitless potential. For most of the city's elite, it was the social event of the season. For Rosalie Marchmont, it was a summons to a life she had purposefully and painfully left behind. She'd almost thrown it away. The name Titan Industries was a brand on her soul, a permanent mark left by her ex-husband Elrich Rowan. Theirs had been a storybook romance, or so the magazines had said. A brilliant, ambitious young man, from a modest background, meets a woman with an inheritance that could launch 1,000 ships, or in their case, a global tech empire. Rosalie's family, the Marchmonts, had been old money, their wealth rooted in real estate and shrewd investments that spanned generations. They weren't flashy, but they were foundational to the city's very architecture. When Rosalie fell for Elrich, her father, a man who could read a balance sheet like a poet reads verse, had been cautious. "He's hungry, Ellie." He'd warned her, his voice a low rumble in his mahogany-paneled study. "Make sure you're not what he's planning to eat." But Rosalie had been in love. She'd seen Elrich's drive not as a threat, but as a thrilling force of nature. She'd believed in his vision, in the dazzling future he painted with such confident strokes. With her inheritance, a sizable portion of which she'd willingly invested as seed money, Titan Industries was born. For 15 years, they were an unstoppable team. Elrich was the face, the charismatic genius who charmed investors and dominated boardrooms. Rosalie was the quiet, strategic mind behind the scenes, her inherited business acumen proving to be as valuable as her capital. She'd managed the company's real estate portfolio, acquiring properties with a foresight that had saved them millions and made them billions. The cracks, when they began to show, were hairline fractures in a seemingly perfect facade. Elrich's business trips grew longer, his explanations vaguer. He became dismissive of her contributions publicly, referring to her as his supportive wife, while taking sole credit for the strategies she'd helped devise. The shared laughter in their sprawling mansion overlooking the bay dwindled, replaced by a tense silence that vibrated with unspoken resentments. Then came the discovery. A misplaced phone, a series of texts that were anything but professional. The other woman was younger, of course. A raven-haired, ambitious junior marketing associate named Wednesday Prescott. She was everything Rosalie was not overtly flirtatious, brazenly ambitious and unburdened by the quiet dignity of old money. The affair had been a swift, brutal affair, a cliché that felt no less devastating for its predictability. The divorce was quiet at Rosalie's insistence. She had no desire to see their shared history splashed across the tabloids. Elrich, eager to avoid a financial bloodbath that could destabilize Titan, had agreed to a generous settlement. Or so he thought. He'd given her a lump sum, a few properties he deemed secondary, and had smugly assumed he'd kept the crown jewels. What he'd overlooked in his haste to move on to his new life with Wednesday was the complex web of trusts and holding companies through which Rosalie and her family owned a significant portion of the city's most valuable commercial real estate. Among them a portfolio that included the Atherton Hotel, the very venue for tonight's gala. It was an oversight born of arrogance, a belief that he had been the true architect of their success, and she merely the scaffolding. So here she was, standing in a secluded alcove of the grand ballroom, a ghost at her own feast. She'd chosen a deep sapphire gown, a stark contrast to the sea of glittering golds and silvers. Her honey-blonde hair was swept back in an elegant chignon, revealing the clean lines of her jaw and a pair of diamond earrings that had been her grandmother's. At 42, she was more beautiful than she had been in her youth, her face etched with a wisdom and a quiet strength that had been forged in the fires of betrayal. She watched as Elrich worked the room Wednesday, clinging to his arm like a victory banner. He was in his element, a sun god dispensing warmth and light to his adoring acolytes. He hadn't aged a day, his dark hair still thick, his smile as blindingly white as ever. He was a master of performance, and tonight was his magnum opus. He was on the verge of acquiring a rival tech firm, a move that would solidify Titan's dominance for the next decade. The air was thick with anticipation, the buzz of speculation, a symphony of greed and admiration. Wednesday, in a crimson dress that left little to the imagination, was playing her part to perfection. She gazed at Elrich with a doe-eyed adoration that made Rosalie's stomach churn. She was young enough to believe that his success was a reflection of her own worth, that his power was a cloak she could wrap herself in. She hadn't yet learned that Elrich's love was a currency he spent only on himself. Rosalie. My God, is that you? Rosalie turned to see a familiar face, a man with a kind, weathered smile and a twinkle in his eye. It was Robert Chen, a senior partner at the law firm that had handled her family's affairs for decades. He was one of the few people who knew the true extent of her holdings. Robert, she said, her voice a little husky. I wasn't sure I'd see any friendly faces tonight. I'm surprised to see you here at all, he admitted, his gaze flicking towards Elrich. Are you sure you're all right? I'm not sure, she confessed, a wry smile touching her lips. But I felt I needed to be here. To close a chapter, perhaps, or to start a new one, Robert suggested, his eyes holding hers with a knowing look. He knew about the Atherton. He'd been the one to finalize the paperwork years ago, a quiet acquisition made through a subsidiary that was so deeply buried in the Marchmont family trust that not even the most diligent of Elrich's lawyers had flagged it. Before Rosalie could respond, a hush fell over the crowd. The lights dimmed, and a single spotlight illuminated the stage at the far end of the ballroom. Elrich and Wednesday were making their way towards it, hand in hand. The moment had arrived. Rosalie felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. She hadn't come here to make a scene. She had come to witness, to stand in the wreckage of her past and know that she had survived. She had come to see the culmination of the empire she had helped build, even if her name was no longer on the letterhead. But as she watched Elrich step up to the podium, his face aglow with triumph, she felt a shift within her. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclamation. Elrich tapped the microphone, the sound echoing through the silent, cavernous space. Good evening, everyone. He began, his voice smooth and confident, the voice that had once whispered promises of forever in her ear. Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate with us. It's been an incredible 10 years for Titan Industries. We've grown from a small startup with a big dream into a global leader in technology." He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd. Rosalie felt a jolt as his gaze seemed to snag on hers for a fraction of a second. There was no recognition, no flicker of surprise. To him, she was just another face in the crowd, a ghost he had long since exorcised. The thought was both a relief and a fresh wound. He continued his speech, a well-rehearsed litany of achievements and future projections. He spoke of the upcoming merger of the new frontiers they would conquer, of the legacy he was building. And then his tone shifted, becoming more personal, more intimate. "But my greatest success," he said, turning to Wednesday and taking her hand, "has not been in the boardroom. It's been in finding a partner who inspires me, who challenges me, and who makes every day a new adventure." He drew Wednesday closer, his arm circling her waist. The spotlight seemed to intensify, bathing them in an ethereal glow. The crowd leaned in their collective breath, held in anticipation. Rosalie's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew what was coming. She had played this scene in her mind 100 times, a masochistic exercise in self-torture. But the reality of it, the public spectacle of it, was a fresh hell. And so Elrich continued, his voice ringing with a sincerity that was utterly false. "I wanted to share another piece of wonderful news with you all tonight. This incredible woman has made me the happiest man in the world, and she has agreed to become my wife." He lifted Wednesday's left hand, and for the first time, Rosalie saw the massive diamond that adorned her finger. A rock so large it seemed to have its own gravitational pull. He leaned in and kissed her, a long, passionate kiss designed for maximum effect. The ballroom erupted in applause, a wave of sound that crashed over Rosalie, threatening to drown her. It was a perfect cinematic moment. A CEO at the pinnacle of his success, his beautiful young fiancée by his side, a future as bright and glittering as the champagne that flowed so freely. But Rosalie Marchmont was not drowning. As she watched the man who had taken everything from her, her love, her trust, her years, bask in the adulation of the crowd, a strange calm settled over her. The hurt was still there, a dull, throbbing ache deep within her chest. But it was now overlaid with something else, something cold and hard and sharp as a shard of glass. She thought of her father's words, "Make sure you're not what he's planning to eat." For years, she had been consumed by him, by his ambition, by his needs. He had feasted on her inheritance, on her intellect, on her love, and then discarded the bones. Tonight, Elrich Rowan was celebrating on what he believed was his own turf. He was standing on the stage of his own triumph in a building he had chosen for its prestige and opulence. He thought he was the master of his universe. Rosalie took a slow, deliberate sip of her champagne, the bubbles fizzing on her tongue. The applause was beginning to die down, but the celebratory buzz remained. Robert Chen was looking at her, his expression a mixture of concern and something else. Anticipation. He knew. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. The chapter was not closing. A new one was indeed beginning. And Elrich Rowan was about to find out that the foundation he had built his empire upon was not nearly as stable as he thought. In fact, he was standing on ground that belonged to the woman he had just erased from his history, and she was about to remind him that she owned the building. The applause finally subsided, leaving a residue of giddy excitement in the air. Elrich kept Wednesday's hand held high, a triumphant gesture that milked the moment for all it was worth. He was a conductor, and this room of power brokers and socialites was his orchestra playing a symphony of his success. He looked out at the sea of faces, his smile unwavering, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. He was assessing the impact of his announcement, gauging the reactions, ensuring that this personal triumph would translate into professional capital. This was Elrich's way. Every moment, every relationship was a transaction. Wednesday was radiant, her face flushed with a mixture of love and adrenaline. She whispered something in Elrich's ear, and he laughed, a deep, resonant sound that carried across the ballroom. To the world, they were the ultimate power couple, a perfect blend of influence and beauty. To Rosalie, they were a meticulously crafted illusion, a public relations campaign, masquerading as a love story. Rosalie remained in her alcove, a still point in the swirling chaos of celebration. People were beginning to move again, forming small clusters to dissect the news. The merger was now a secondary topic. The engagement was the real story. She could hear snippets of conversation floating past her. Did you know they were even engaged? She's stunning, but so young. That ring must have cost more than my house. Robert Chen moved closer to her, his presence a comforting anchor. Are you ready? He asked quietly, his voice barely audible above the din. Rosalie took a deep breath, the scent of expensive perfume and wilting flowers filling her lungs. I don't know if I'll ever be ready, Robert, she admitted. But it's time. The staff is on standby, he informed her. The hotel manager, Mr. Albright, is waiting for your signal. She nodded, her gaze fixed on the stage. Elrich was now being swarmed by well-wishers, a king holding court. He was accepting handshakes and backpats, his arm still possessively around Wednesday's waist. He was untouchable, invincible. Or so he believed. Rosalie's plan had not been born of vengeance, not initially. It had been a defensive measure, a way to protect herself and her assets from the fallout of their divorce. But as the months had passed, as she'd watched Elrich's star continue to rise, while her own contributions to his success were systematically erased, a quiet resolve had hardened within her. It was no longer just about protecting what was hers. It was about reclaiming her narrative. Tonight, Elrich had not just announced his engagement, he had publicly declared her irrelevant. And that was a fiction she could no longer abide. She pulled out her phone, a sleek, minimalist device that was a stark contrast to the diamond-encrusted cases so popular in this crowd. With a few taps, she sent a single, pre-written message to Mr. Albright. Proceed. Across the ballroom, a man in an impeccably tailored tuxedo, his silver hair neatly combed, received the message. He gave a subtle nod to a uniformed security guard standing near the main entrance. The guard spoke into his wrist, and in the control room, deep within the hotel's bowels, a technician flipped a series of switches. The first indication that something was amiss was subtle. The music, a lively jazz ensemble that had been playing in the background, faltered and then died completely. The hum of the air conditioning system, a sound so ubiquitous that it had gone unnoticed, also ceased. A sudden, almost oppressive silence descended upon the ballroom. The crowd, which had been a cacophony of chatter and laughter, grew quiet. People looked around, their expressions a mixture of confusion and annoyance. A power outage at the Atherton unthinkable. The hotel was known for its seamless service, its flawless execution. Elrich, who had been in the middle of a sentence, stopped talking. He frowned, his eyes scanning the room for an explanation. He was a man who craved control, and this unexpected interruption was an unwelcome intrusion into his perfectly orchestrated evening. Then the main lights in the ballroom, the massive crystal chandeliers that had dripped with light, flickered once, twice, and then went dark. A collective gasp swept through the room, followed by a wave of nervous laughter. For a moment, the The only light came from the emergency exit signs and the faint glow of the city skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows. But the darkness lasted only for a few seconds. A single spotlight, the same one that had illuminated Elrich and Wednesday on stage, suddenly flared to life. But it was no longer pointed at the stage. It was now aimed at a different part of the room, at a secluded alcove where a woman in a sapphire gown stood, a champagne flute held loosely in her hand. Rosalie didn't flinch. She had anticipated this moment, had rehearsed it in her mind. But the reality of 200 pairs of eyes suddenly swiveling in her direction was still a shock to the system. She could feel the weight of their collective gaze, the intensity of their curiosity. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Who was she? What was happening? Elrich's eyes, now accustomed to the dim light, found her. And this time there was a flicker of recognition. It was faint, confused, like trying to place a face from a long-forgotten dream. But it was there. He squinted, his head tilting slightly. Rosalie. It couldn't be. What was she doing here? And then a new voice filled the silence. It was calm, professional, and amplified by the hotel's integrated sound system, which had miraculously just come back to life. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the momentary interruption. There is a small technical issue which we are addressing. It was Mr. Albright, the hotel manager. He was now standing on the stage at the podium Elrich had just vacated. He looked composed, authoritative. However, he continued, his voice resonating with a newfound gravity. We have a brief, unscheduled announcement to make. He paused, letting the suspense build. The spotlight remained fixed on Rosalie, who stood as still as a statue. Elrich was now staring at her openly, his confusion rapidly turning to suspicion. His hand tightened on Wednesday's arm, a reflexive gesture of possession. Wednesday looked from Elrich to Rosalie, her brow furrowed in a pretty perplexed frown. Tonight's gala is a celebration of Titan Industries, Mr. Albright said, his voice echoing in the silent room. And the Atherton Hotel is proud to host such a prestigious event. However, there seems to be a slight misunderstanding that we feel needs to be corrected. He looked directly at Elrich, a man he had been deferring to all evening, and his expression was now unreadable, almost cold. Mr. Rowan, he said, his voice polite but firm. While we appreciate your patronage, we feel it is important to acknowledge the true owner of this establishment, a woman whose vision and commitment to excellence have made the Atherton the landmark that it is today. The spotlight on Rosalie seemed to intensify, bathing her in a brilliant, almost celestial light. She felt like an actress on a stage, the leading lady in a drama of her own making. Mr. Albright made a sweeping gesture towards her. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in acknowledging the owner of the Atherton Hotel, the president of the Marchmont Heritage Group, Ms. Rosalie Marchmont. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum of void, where the air had been sucked out of the room. 200 of the city's most powerful people were frozen in a state of collective shock, and then a single sound broke the silence. A soft, incredulous laugh. It came from Wednesday. She thought it was a joke, some kind of elaborate, tasteless prank. But one look at Elrich's face told her it was not. His smile was gone, replaced by a mask of disbelief. His face, which had been flushed with triumph, was now a ghastly shade of white. His eyes were locked on Rosalie, and for the first time that night, he saw her. He truly saw her, not as the ghost of his past, but as a living, breathing force that had just hijacked his reality. The name Marchmont hung in the air, a name that had once been synonymous with his own success, a name he had carefully excised from the corporate history of Titan Industries, the Marchmont Heritage Group. He'd heard of it, of course, a powerhouse in commercial real estate, notoriously private, almost mythical in its influence. He had never made the connection. He had been so blinded by his own brilliance, so convinced of his own narrative, that he had failed to see the truth that was hiding in plain sight. The crowd began to stir, the initial shock giving way to a frantic, whispered exchange of information. People were pulling out their phones, their fingers flying across the screens as they Googled Rosalie Marchmont and Marchmont Heritage Group. The pieces were starting to click into place, and the picture they were forming was a stunning reversal of fortune. Rosalie finally moved. She lifted her chin, her expression serene, almost regale. She was no longer hiding in the shadows. She was bathed in light, the center of a universe that was rapidly reconfiguring itself around her. She took a step forward out of the alcove and into the main base of the ballroom. The crowd parted for her as if she were royalty, their faces a mixture of awe, confusion, and dawning respect. She was no longer just Elrich Rowan's ex-wife. She was Rosalie Marchmont, the woman who owned the ground beneath their feet. Her eyes met Elrich's across the crowded room. The shock on his face was now curdling into a dark, impotent rage. He had been a king in his castle, only to discover that the castle belonged to the queen he had banished. Rosalie gave him a small, enigmatic smile. It was not a smile of triumph or of malice. It was a smile of quiet, unassailable power, the kind of power he had always craved, but had never truly possessed. She then turned her attention to the woman standing beside him, the woman who was wearing a ring that had been bought with money, that had its roots in the Marchmont family fortune. Wednesday's face was a mess of confusion and dawning horror. The fairy tale was crumbling around her, the handsome prince revealed to be a fool, and the castle built on a foundation of lies. Rosalie's gaze lingered on her for a moment, a silent acknowledgement of the brutal lesson she was about to learn. And then she turned away her attention once again on the crowd, on the people who had come to celebrate her ex-husband's success. She raised her champagne flute, the crystal glinting in the spotlight. Her voice when she spoke was clear and steady, carrying across the silent room without the need for a microphone. "Welcome," she said, her voice laced with a subtle irony to my hotel. The echo of Rosalie's words, "Welcome to my hotel," resonated through the vast ballroom, not as a shout, but as a quiet, seismic shift that cracked the very foundations of the evening. It was a statement of simple fact delivered with the placid grace of a queen, and it landed with the devastating force of a declaration of war. For a long, suspended moment, there was only a cavernous silence, a collective intake of breath from 200 of the city's most influential figures. Then the silence shattered. Not into applause, but into a cacophony of sound, a surge of sharp, incredulous whispers, the rustle of silk and wool, as bodies shifted, turning towards each other with wide, questioning eyes. The air, once thick with champagne-fueled celebration, was now charged with the electric hum of scandal. The click and glow of smartphones being unlocked became a sound in itself, a digital wildfire as guests frantically searched for the connection between Rosalie Marchmont and the Marchmont Heritage Group. The city's elite, a class of people who prided themselves on knowing everything about everyone, were caught in a vortex of information they hadn't possessed moments before, and their hunger for it was voracious. On the stage which had been his throne of triumph, Elrich stood as if flash-frozen. The spotlight felt less like a celebration and more like an accusation. His face, which had been a mask of confident charm, was now a ghastly white canvas on which disbelief and fury waged a violent war. His mind, usually sharp and several steps ahead, was struggling to catch up. Marchmont, the Marchmont Heritage Group. He knew the name, of course. A quiet, almost mythical giant in commercial real estate, notoriously private, their holdings woven into the very fabric of the city. He'd never once made the connection. He had been so consumed by his own narrative, so blinded by the brilliance of the empire he believed he had built alone, that he had failed to see the name that had been there all along, hidden in plain sight, the bedrock beneath his feet. Beside him, Wednesday made a soft, choking sound. The fairy tale had dissolved into a nightmare with terrifying speed. She looked from Elrich's stunned face to the woman in sapphire, and the pieces began to click into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't a bitter ex-wife. This was a formidable power. The pitying glances she now felt from the crowd were like tiny, sharp needles against her skin. She had been the prize, the symbol of Elrich's new life. Now she was just the fool, standing next to the Emperor, who had just been revealed to have no clothes. She took an involuntary half-step away from him, a small, telling gesture of self-preservation that did not go unnoticed. Rosalie, meanwhile, was the calm at the center of the storm she had unleashed. She gave a near imperceptible nod to Robert Chen, who stood by her side, a silent sentinel. Then she moved. She stepped out from the relative obscurity of her alcove and began to walk, her pace unhurried, her posture radiating a composure that was its own form of power. It was a masterful play. She wasn't fleeing the chaos. She was commanding it, forcing every eye to follow her as she advanced. The crowd, a dense sea of black tie and couture, parted for her, instinctively the way water parts for the bow of a ship. There was a new deference in their eyes, a dawning awe. She was no longer a ghost from Elrich's past. She was a revelation. Her path was a direct line to the stage, a slow, deliberate march toward the man who had discarded her. With every step she took, the tension in the room coiled tighter. The air vibrated with anticipation. This was no longer a corporate announcement. It was a personal reckoning, and everyone in the room had a front-row seat. Elrich watched her approach, his jaw clenched so hard a muscle pulsed in his cheek. The sight of her, so serene, so utterly in control of the situation, stoked the flames of his rage. She was supposed to be a footnote in his biography, a vanquished memory. Instead, she had just become the headline. His survival instincts screamed at him. He was a fighter. He had clawed his way to the top and had never backed down. He would not start now. As Rosalie reached the foot of the stage, she paused, tilting her head back slightly to look up at him. The raised platform, which he had chosen to amplify his presence, now served only to isolate him, making him a target on a pedestal. Rosalie. He finally ground out his voice, a low, dangerous growl that was meant to intimidate. What is the meaning of this? I believe Mr. Albright was quite clear. She replied, her voice cool and even, carrying easily in the tense silence. She did not raise it. She didn't need to. Every ear was straining to hear. I own this hotel. She let the statement settle for a beat before adding the final devastating stroke. And you, Elrich, are a guest. She imbued the word guest with a universe of meaning. It redefined him. He was not the host, not the master, not the king. He was merely present at her sufferance. The raw insult was too much for Wednesday. Her own humiliation, her own terror needed a target, and the woman before her was it. She found her voice, though it was shrill and unsteady. You have no right. This is our night. our celebration. You're just a bitter, jealous ex-wife, trying to ruin everything because he chose me." It was a desperate, clumsy attack, and Rosalie met it not with anger, but with a gaze that held a universe of weary pity. It was the look of a woman who had already fought and won this war years ago, in the silent desolation of her own heart. "My dear," she said, her voice softening with a condescension that was far more cutting than any shout. A piece of unsolicited advice from one woman to another. "Before you agree to marry a man, you should really do your due diligence." Her eyes flickered to the ostentatious diamond on Wednesday's finger, then back to her face. A lesson I learned far too late. "You see some assets," she continued, her words precise and devastating, "come with liabilities you can't see on the balance sheet." Wednesday flinched, as if she'd been physically struck, her face paling. The insult delivered in the cold, impersonal language of their world had found its mark. Elrich's control finally snapped. The humiliation was absolute, the challenge to his authority undeniable. "Get out!" he seethed, taking an aggressive step to the edge of the stage, his hands clenching into white-knuckled fists. He pointed a trembling finger at Rosalie. "This is my event. This is a Titan Industries gala. I paid for this ballroom." He played his trump card, his voice rising with a self-righteous fury. A low gasp rippled through the onlookers. The confrontation had devolved into a raw, ugly dispute over a bill. But Rosalie didn't even flinch. She simply held his gaze, a flicker of something almost amused in her eyes. Then she shifted her attention past him to the man standing frozen at the podium. "Mr. Albright." She called out, her voice a model of professional decorum. "Perhaps you could clarify the booking arrangements for Mr. Rowan." Mr. Albright, who had been waiting for his cue, straightened his tie. He looked down at Elrich with an expression of polite, professional regret. "Certainly, Ms. Marchmont." He turned back to the microphone, his voice amplified throughout the room, each word a nail in Elrich's coffin. While Titan Industries did indeed make a booking for the grand ballroom tonight, that booking was made with the hotel's previous ownership group. As of the first of this quarter, all outstanding event contracts were transferred to the new management under the purview of the Marchmont Heritage Group. He paused, allowing the legalistic explanation to sink in, stripping Elrich of his one claim. Then came the final exquisite twist of the knife. As a gesture of goodwill to a prominent member of the city's business community, he continued looking directly at Elrich. "Miss Marchmont graciously instructed us to honor the event under its original terms." He lifted a folder from the podium, which I might add included a significant professional courtesy discount. A wave of stifled laughter and shocked murmurs swept the ballroom. The humiliation was now breathtaking in its completeness. Elrich Rowan wasn't just a guest. He was a discount guest. He was at his own coronation on a coupon provided by the ex-wife he had tried to erase. The story was now legend. Elrich's face was a thundercloud of impotent fury. He had been played out-maneuvered at every turn publicly and expertly. His rage turned inward, a venomous snarling thing in his chest. "This is not over." "Rosalie," he snarled, his voice a low hiss meant only for her. It was a promise, a threat. Rosalie stepped closer to the stage, looking up at him, her expression unreadable. "Oh, I know," she replied, her voice equally quiet, a calm sea that hid unfathomable depths. "It's just getting started." She paused, a final, perfectly timed beat. "I believe we have a board meeting for the new acquisition on Monday morning. I was so pleased to see the merger go through." Elrich stared at her, uncomprehending. What was she talking about? "I'll be there, of course," she continued, as if discussing the weather. "As a major shareholder in the company you just acquired, I feel it's important I take a more active role in its future." And there it was, the checkmate. The final devastating blow he never saw coming. It wasn't just about the hotel. While he was planning his gala, his victory party, she had been quietly, ruthlessly buying up a controlling interest in his prize. She hadn't just taken back the stage. She had infiltrated his castle. The rage on Elrich's face dissolved, replaced by something he hadn't felt since he was a penniless young man, with nothing but ambition, raw, chilling fear. He had seen her as sentimental, soft, an obstacle he had overcome long ago. He had never once seen her as a strategist, a predator. He had fatally underestimated her, and he was only now beginning to understand the price of that mistake. Rosalie held his gaze for one last long moment. It was a look that encompassed 15 years of shared history, of love and betrayal, of pain and rebirth. It was a look of finality. Then she turned her back on him. She turned her back on the stage, on the wreckage of his life, on the woman who had replaced her, and she walked away. The crowd parted for her again, but this time the awe was mixed with a palpable fear and respect. She was not Elrich Rowan's ex-wife. She was Rosalie Marchmont, and she was a force to be reckoned with. As she reached the grand archway of the ballroom, she allowed herself a brief final glance over her shoulder. The spotlight was still on the stage, illuminating Elrich and Wednesday, two figures trapped and isolated in the glare of their public ruin. The triumphant applause was a distant, mocking echo. The rest of the glittering world was just shadows and whispers. She had come tonight to witness the end of a chapter. Instead, she had seized the pen and written a beginning. Her beginning. And as she stepped out of the ballroom and into the cool, quiet promise of the night, she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that the story was finally hers. The morning after the Starlight Gala, Elrich Rowan woke to a silence that was more damning than any accusation. The cavernous bedroom of his sterile, modernist mansion was usually filled with the low hum of Market Watch channels or the cheerful chatter of Wednesday making coffee. Today, there was nothing. The sun streaming through the vast, unadorned windows felt intrusive, painfully bright. He felt a throbbing behind his eyes that had nothing to do with champagne and everything to do with the utter public demolition of his world. His phone lying on the marble nightstand was a dark mirror reflecting his pale, drawn face. He dreaded touching it, knowing it was a Pandora's box of digital condemnation. When he finally did, the screen lit up with a deluge of notifications, dozens of missed calls, hundreds of unread messages, and a news alert that made his stomach clench. It was from the Wall Street Journal, the headline stark and brutal. Titan's throne, shaken Rowan's ex-wife, revealed as landlord and key shareholder in hostile power play. The story was everywhere. It wasn't just a juicy piece of gossip for the society pages. It was a lead story on every major financial news outlet. The Titan and the Ghost One popular blog had dubbed them. Another more pointedly asked Rowan's empire, built on Marchmont's foundation. The narrative he had spent a decade and a half meticulously crafting, that of the self-made genius, the visionary who had built an empire from scratch, had been irrevocably rewritten overnight. He was now a caricature, the arrogant husband who had ridden his wife's coattails, discarded her, and then been foolish enough to celebrate his new life on her property. The frantic calls began. First to his lead counsel, a man whose usual swagger was replaced by a stammering unease. Then to his head of P, who spoke in funereal tones about damage control and reframing the narrative, hollow phrases that offered no comfort. The investors, the ones he had personally courted and won over with his charisma, were next. Their voices were tight with a new, chilling politeness, their questions sharp. How could he have been unaware of such a significant asset transfer? What other liabilities were hidden from the board? His assurances sounded weak, desperate even to his own ears. He had built his kingdom on the perception of infallibility. That perception had been shattered. His personal life imploded with equal swiftness. Wednesday emerged from the guest wing, her face puffy from crying, her crimson gala dress from the night before now looking like a cheap costume. The fairy tale was over. "They're calling me a gold digger," she said, her voice thin and brittle. "A home wrecker who got played. Do you know how humiliating that is? Do you think this is about you?" Elrich snapped the pressure inside him, erupting. "My entire company, my life's work, is on the line because of her." "You lied to me, Elrich." She shot back the doe-eyed adoration of the previous night, replaced by a hard, resentful glare. "You let me stand on that stage and look like a fool. You told me she was nobody, a relic from your past. It turns out she's the one who owns everything." The massive diamond on her finger seemed to mock her. It wasn't a key to a kingdom. It was a souvenir from a failed coup. The argument was short and ugly, stripping away the last vestiges of their glamorous illusion. It was a transaction that had soured, and both parties wanted out. Within the week, Wednesday was gone. The ring sat in its velvet box on Elrich's dresser, a multi-million-dollar monument to his hubris. The silence in the mansion returned heavier and more permanent this time. He was alone with the consequences of his own arrogance. While Elrich's world imploded, Rosalie's expanded with a quiet, deliberate focus. She worked not from a war room, but from the serene, book-lined study of her family's townhouse, the same room where her father had once taught her about long-term value over short-term gain. She refused all requests for interviews, letting the facts as they had been so publicly revealed speak for themselves. Her power was not in what she said, but in what she owned and what she was now meticulously planning to do. "He'll come to the board meeting with an army of lawyers," Robert Chen warned, looking over a stack of corporate bylaws. "He'll try to paint you as vindictive, emotionally compromised." Rosalie looked up from a set of architectural blueprints spread across the grand mahogany desk. "That's why I'm not coming with lawyers, Robert. I'm coming with a better plan." She tapped a section of the blueprints. "Elrich thinks in terms of acquisitions and hostile takeovers. He sees business as a battlefield. I see it as an ecosystem. He wants to conquer. I intend to cultivate." Her preparation was relentless. For days, she and a small, trusted team of the country's top financial and logistical analysts dissected the merged companies. They found redundancies. Elrich had missed opportunities he had dismissed. Her vision was holistic, integrating the Marchmont Heritage Group's real estate assets with Titan's technological prowess. It was audacious, innovative, and most importantly, undeniably profitable. She wasn't preparing for a fight. She was preparing to govern. The atmosphere in the Titan Industries boardroom on the day of the first meeting was electric with tension. The long, polished table felt like a dueling ground. The board members, a collection of pragmatic, powerful individuals, sat with stony expressions, their allegiances uncertain. They had come to witness a soap opera. They were about to decide the future of a multi-billion-dollar empire. Elrich arrived, flanked by his legal team. his face set in a grim mask of defiance. He looked every inch the cornered predator ready to lash out. He spoke first, his voice tight with controlled fury. He spoke of fiduciary duty, of shareholder disruption, and launched into a thinly veiled attack on Rosalie's motives, painting her as a scorned woman, seeking personal revenge at the company's expense. Then it was Rosalie's turn. She walked to the head of the table alone, projecting an aura of calm that was more intimidating than any army of lawyers. She carried no binders of legal threats, only a slim tablet. "Gentlemen," she began, her voice even and clear, resonating with an authority that had nothing to do with volume. "Mr. Rowan is correct that our duty is to our shareholders, and that is precisely why I am here." What followed was a masterclass in corporate strategy. She did not mention her personal history with Elrich. She did not speak of betrayal or humiliation. She spoke of synergy, of innovation, of sustainable growth. She presented a detailed, data-driven vision for the newly expanded Titan Industries. She showed them blueprints for new state-of-the-art tech campuses built on VHG-owned land, slashing long-term operational costs. She laid out a plan for diversifying into emerging markets, backed by VHG's international real estate holdings. And she spoke of creating a corporate culture that valued collaboration and integrity, a quiet, devastating critique of Elrich's autocratic reign. She dismantled Elrich's proposed strategy not with attacks, but with superior logic and more compelling numbers. The board, who had braced for a messy personal war, listened with growing fascination, then dawning respect. They saw in Rosalie not a bitter ex-wife, but a shrewd, formidable leader. They saw a future for the company that was more stable, more ambitious, and ultimately more lucrative. When she finished, the silence in the room was profound. It was the silence of a paradigm shifting. The vote was a mere formality. Rosalie's plan was adopted, and in a move that sealed Elrich's fate, she was nominated and elected as the new chairwoman of the board. He was not fired. That would have been too clean, too merciful. Instead, he was neutered. He kept the title of CEO, the corner office, the extravagant salary. But his power was gone, his authority subject to the approval of the woman he had tried to destroy. He was a figurehead forced to sit in his gilded cage and execute a vision that was not his every move overseen by the board that Rosalie now commanded. He was a ghost in his own machine. In the year that followed, Rosalie's revolution was quiet but total. The culture at Titan changed. The fear-based sycophancy that had defined Elrich's tenure was replaced by a new energy of innovation and collaboration. She was a constant presence, not as an overlord, but as a guiding force. Her business acumen, so long suppressed and undervalued, now flourished in the light. She was lauded in the business press as a visionary. One evening, a year after the gala, Rosalie stood in her office, the penthouse suite of the Atherton Hotel that she had claimed as the new VHG headquarters. The view of the city was breathtaking, a glittering tapestry of lights. She now saw not just as a landscape, but as a portfolio. There was a soft knock. Robert Chen entered, holding a single, long-stemmed white rose. "This was left for you at the front desk, Rosalie," he said, a knowing smile on his face. "No card." Rosalie took the rose, its petals flawless. It was not a plea for forgiveness or a declaration of love. It was a white flag, a silent, unconditional surrender from a defeated king, a final, bitter acknowledgement that she had won. She placed it in a simple crystal vase on her desk, its solitary elegance a quiet testament to her victory. She hadn't needed to scream or to exact a petty public revenge. She had simply reclaimed what was hers, her history, her legacy, her name. She looked out at the glittering city, her city, and felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The past was no longer a wound. It was a foundation. And she, Rosalie Marchmont, was the architect. And there you have it, a story of betrayal, resilience, and the ultimate reclamation of power. Rosalie Marchmont's journey reminds us that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful, and that underestimating someone can be the most costly mistake of all. It's a testament to the fact that true strength isn't about public declarations, but about the solid foundations you build both in business and in life. If you were captivated by Rosalie's story and the dramatic implosion of Elrich's world, please let me know in the comments below. What was your favorite twist? Who do you think was the ultimate winner in this corporate chess game? Don't forget to hit that like button. If you enjoyed this video. What happens when the perfect life is built on a perfect lie? For 7 months, Catherine Vance Thorne believed she had it all. A loving husband, a multi-million-dollar empire at their fingertips, and their first child on the way. She pictured a future filled with laughter in their sprawling Manhattan penthouse. But her husband, the charismatic Marcus Thorne, was painting a different picture, one created during clandestine business trips. When a single damning clue sends a 7 months pregnant Catherine on a desperate drive to a secluded Hamptons resort, the masterpiece of deceit Marcus has been crafting is about to be slashed to ribbons. This isn't just a story of infidelity. It's a saga of high-stakes betrayal, corporate espionage, and a woman who discovers that the greatest power isn't in wealth, but in ruin. Stay with us. The late afternoon sun slanted through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, casting long, distorted shadows across the Italian marble floors. From this vantage point, 60 stories above Central Park, New York City, looked like a schematic, a perfect grid of ambition and light. Catherine Vance Thorne rested a hand on the gentle, prominent swell of her abdomen, feeling the faint, fluttering kicks of the life within her. At 7 months pregnant, she felt both profoundly powerful and exquisitely vulnerable. The nursery was complete, a serene masterpiece of cream and gentle grey, with a handcrafted mobile of celestial bodies waiting to spin above a crib that had cost more than most people's cars. Everything in her life was curated for perfection, a testament to the combined might of the Vance and Thorne dynasties. Her family, the Vances, were old money, their wealth rooted in shipping and real estate, a quiet, unshakable force in the city's financial landscape. Marcus's fortune was newer, louder, forged in the volatile crucible of hedge funds. He was the brilliant, daring wunderkind, the man who could scent a market shift like a shark smells blood. Their marriage had been the society event of the year, a merger of legacy and audacity. Catherine traced the rim of a crystal glass, the condensation cool against her fingertips. She looked at her husband, who stood with his back to her phone, pressed to his ear. Marcus Thorne was a man sculpted by success. His Savile Row suit draped perfectly over his athletic frame, and his voice, even muffled, was a low, confident baritone that could soothe panicked investors and charm seasoned CEOs. He was her rock, the charismatic architect of their shared future. Or so she believed. "No, absolutely not," he said into the phone, his tone sharp. "The timeline is immutable. We move on the 25th, not a day later. Handle it." He ended the call with a decisive tap and turned a practiced smile instantly softening the hard lines of his face. "Sorry about that, my love. Incompetence is the one market I can't seem to short." He crossed the vast living room, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the plush Aubusson rug. He knelt before her, placing a hand over hers on her belly. "And how are my two favorite people in the world doing?" "We're good." Catherine smiled the familiar warmth of his touch, chasing away a flicker of unease. "He's been active today. I think he's going to be a soccer player. Or a CEO who kicks his competitors into submission." Marcus grinned, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He leaned in and kissed her a deep, reassuring kiss that tasted faintly of expensive whiskey and something else she couldn't quite name. A scent. It wasn't his usual cologne Creed Aventus, nor was it her perfume. It was floral and slightly spicy, a woman's scent. She dismissed it. He'd been in meetings all day, surrounded by people. It meant nothing. "Listen." He began settling back on his heels, his expression turning serious. "Something's come up. A big something. You know the tech merger I've been working on? The one in San Francisco?" Catherine nodded. It was all he had talked about for weeks, a complex acquisition that would, in his words, reshape the digital landscape. "Well, the key players have flown in for an unscheduled summit. It's last minute, I know, and I hate it, but I have to fly out tonight. It's only for a couple of days. 3 at the most. It's the final push, Kat. This deal will secure our child's future 10 times over." A knot of disappointment tightened in her chest. "Tonight? But Marcus, my checkup is tomorrow. The big one. We were supposed to hear the heartbeat together again." His face fell with practiced, perfect sympathy. "I know, my love. I am so sorry. Believe me, I would rather be here holding your hand than in a sterile boardroom. But this is critical. The timing is everything." He stroked her cheek. "I'll be back before you know it, and I promise I will not miss another appointment. I'll make it up to you. A week in Moustique after the baby comes. Just the 3 of us." The promise of a future luxury was a common balm he applied to present disappointments. It usually worked, but this time the unease lingered. It was the suddenness of it all. Marcus was a meticulous planner. Last-minute chaos wasn't his style. "Of course," she said, forcing a smile. "I understand. It's for us." "Exactly," he said, relief washing over his features. He stood and kissed her forehead. "I'll go pack. My flight is in 3 hours." As he walked towards their master suite, Catherine's gaze fell on his briefcase, which he had left by the sofa. A corner of a receipt was peeking out from the side pocket. Normally, she would never have looked. It would have felt like a violation, a crack in the foundation of their trust. But the faint alien scent of perfume, the suddenness of the trip, the slickness of his explanation, it all coalesced into a single sharp point of curiosity. Her heart thumping with a strange mix of guilt and apprehension, she reached out and slowly, carefully pulled the receipt free. It wasn't from a restaurant or a client lunch. It was from La Perle, the lingerie boutique. The date was from that very afternoon. She scanned the items: a silk chemise, an eyelash lace bra, a matching thong. Size small. Catherine was a medium, and with her pregnancy she had been living in comfortable, soft cotton. A cold dread, heavy and suffocating, began to seep into her bones. There could be an explanation. A gift for a friend's wife. A present for her, for after the baby. But why hide it? Why wouldn't he have given it to her with a flourish as he usually did? She quickly folded the receipt and slipped it back, her hands trembling. She took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to calm the frantic thrumming of her pulse. She was being paranoid. The stress of the pregnancy was making her imagine things. Marcus loved her. He was building a life for them. He was a good man. He emerged from the bedroom 20 minutes later, pulling a sleek Rimowa carry-on. He was already in his travel attire, a comfortable but stylish cashmere sweater and dark trousers. He looked every bit the global executive on the move. All set, he announced, his voice breezy. "The car is waiting downstairs. Now I want you to promise me you'll rest. Don't overdo it. Beatrice is coming over tomorrow to go with you to the doctor, right?" Catherine nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Her sister Beatrice had always been more cynical about Marcus, seeing his ambition as a razor's edge that could easily cut both ways. Catherine had always defended him, painting Beatrice's concerns as sisterly overprotection. Now Beatrice's skeptical words echoed in her mind. "Good," Marcus said. He pulled her into a hug, his arms strong and secure. It felt like a lie. The whole embrace felt like a hollow performance. "I'll call you the moment I land. I love you more than anything." "I love you too," she managed to whisper the words, feeling like ash in her mouth. She watched from the window as he got into the black town car, a tiny, insignificant figure 60 floors below. The car didn't turn east towards JFK or LaGuardia. It headed west towards the West Side Highway, towards the Hamptons. The cold dread solidified into a terrifying certainty. The San Francisco Tech Summit was a lie. The lingerie wasn't for her. And her husband was not on a business trip. He was on his way to a rendezvous. Alone in the cavernous silence of their penthouse, surrounded by the Hewland trapping of their perfect life, Catherine Vance Thorne finally allowed the facade to crack. A single hot tear traced a path down her cheek, a silent harbinger of the storm that was about to break. She was not just a wife. She was a Vance. And the Vances did not crumble. They fought back. The question was, how? The initial shock was already hardening into something else, something cold and sharp. A plan began to form in the ruins of her trust, a plan that would take her from her gilded cage and set her on a collision course with the ugly truth. The silence in the penthouse after Marcus left was no longer peaceful. It was suffocating. Every ticking clock, every hum from the climate control system seemed to mock Catherine's newfound solitude. She walked through the grand rooms, touching the cold surfaces of their shared life, the polished mahogany of the dining table where they'd hosted glittering dinner parties, the soft leather of the armchair where he read the Wall Street Journal every morning. It all felt like a movie set the backdrop for a story she had mistakenly believed was her own. She sank onto the edge of their vast bed, the La Perla receipt burning a hole in her mind. It was a single piece of evidence, perhaps circumstantial. She needed more. Doubt was a poison, but certainty was a weapon. Her mind raced, sifting through the last few weeks, searching for other inconsistencies she had glossed over. The late-night conference calls, where his voice was hushed the weekends he'd spent at the office, but came home looking relaxed, not tired. The password on his personal laptop, which had always been her birthday, was suddenly changed. At the time, she had chalked it up to his company's new cybersecurity protocols. Now it seemed like a locked door she had never thought to question. The next morning, Beatrice arrived, her sharp eyes immediately registering the tension in Catherine's posture. Beatrice Vance was the opposite of her sister in many ways. Where Catherine was diplomatic and serene, Beatrice was blunt and fiery, her loyalty fierce and her bullshit detector flawless. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Beatrice said, foregoing a hello as she dropped her purse onto a chair. Did the Prince of Wall Street forget to kiss his pregnant princess goodbye? Catherine's composure, so carefully maintained, overnight crumbled. She handed her sister the receipt. Beatrice's eyes narrowed as she read it, her lips tightening into a thin line. Size small. Beatrice said flatly, "Well, that's not for you, is it? Not unless he's planning for 2 years from now. The man is many things, but a forward planner in lingerie is not one of them." She looked up at Catherine, her expression softening from sarcasm to deep concern. "Oh, Kath." What did he say? Through tears she could no longer suppress. Catherine recounted the story, the sudden trip, the San Francisco excuse, the car heading west. The Hamptons, Beatrice breathed, her mind already working. Of course, it's off-season, quiet, exclusive, the perfect place to hide a dirty little secret in plain sight. Marcus has a corporate account at the Seagate. It's one of those ridiculously private resorts where the staff is trained to be blind, deaf, and dumb. Catherine's blood ran cold. The Seagate. Marcus had taken her there for their first anniversary. It was secluded, nestled in a private cove, a haven of understated luxury. The memory was now tainted, corrupted. "I have to know, Bea." Catherine said, her voice gaining a steely edge that surprised even herself. "I can't sit here in this museum of our marriage and wait for him to come home smelling of lies and another woman's perfume. I have to see it for myself." Beatrice studied her sister. The tear-stained face was still there, but beneath it, a new resolve was hardening. This was the Vance bloodline, kicking in the same indomitable will that had allowed their great-grandfather to build a shipping empire from nothing. "Are you sure?" Kath Beatrice asked gently. "You're 7 months pregnant. The stress, the shock." "What's more stressful?" Catherine countered, standing up, her hands protectively cradling her belly. "The agonizing uncertainty, or the cold, hard truth? This isn't just about my feelings anymore. This is about my child. I will not bring my son or daughter into a life built on a foundation of deceit. I need to know what I'm fighting." Beatrice nodded slowly, a grim smile touching her lips. "All right, then let's go to war. But we do it smart. No dramatic phone calls, no hysterics. We gather irrefutable proof. We need more than a receipt for some slutty underwear." The first step was logistics. A trip to the doctor's office was repurposed. While Beatrice waited in the car, Catherine had her appointment. The strong, steady rhythm of her baby's heartbeat was a reassurance, a tiny drumbeat of courage. She asked her obstetrician, Dr. Miller, if light travel was permissible. "Everything looks perfect," Catherine Dr. Miller said warmly. "A short car ride, say a couple of hours, is perfectly fine. Just stay hydrated and don't overexert yourself." It was the clearance she needed. The next step was intel. While Catherine was at the doctor's, Beatrice was on the phone calling in a favor from a friend who worked in high-end concierge services. It was a long shot, but the world of the ultra-wealthy was surprisingly small. When Catherine returned to the car, Beatrice was tapping furiously on her phone. "Okay. I think I have something," she said, her voice low and excited. "My friend Jessica owes me one." She pulled some strings. "She can't access the Seagate's official guest list, but she has a source in their spa. Jessica's source confirms a booking was made for this afternoon. A 90-minute couple's deep tissue massage, booked under the name Mr. Thorne. The reservation notes specify 2 therapists, male and female, for Mr. and Mrs. Thorne. The words Mrs. Thorne felt like a physical blow. He was not just with another woman. He was giving her Catherine's title, her identity, in this secret, sordid world he had created. The appointment is at 4 p.m. Beatrice continued, her voice hardening. That's in 3 hours. We can make it if we leave now. The plan was audacious, bordering on reckless, but it was the only path forward that felt real. Catherine called the family's trusted driver, a stoic man named Frank, who had been with the Vances for 30 years and knew how to be discreet. She simply told him they needed to go to the Hamptons. He asked no questions. The drive out of the city was a blur. The familiar skyline receded, replaced by the manicured suburbs, and then the long, flat stretch of the Long Island Expressway. Catherine sat in the plush leather seat of the Mercedes, a bottle of water in her hand, her mind a maelstrom of past memories and future fears. She remembered Marcus proposing to her on a wind-swept cliff in Big Sur, telling her that his life had been black and white until she brought the color. Had that been a lie, too? Was he a sociopath, a brilliant actor playing the part of a loving husband? Beatrice, ever the pragmatist, was strategizing. Okay, when we get there, we can't just storm in. We need to be smart. You are Catherine Vance Thorne. You have every right to be there. We'll go to the front desk. You'll say you're surprising your husband. You'll be charming, poised. They know the Vance name. They won't question you. Ask for a key to his suite. The Oceanfront Villa 7. That's where he is. Beatrice had managed to get the villa number from her source. Villa 7. The most private, most expensive accommodation at the resort, with its own private plunge pool and a terrace that overlooked the desolate beauty of the winter ocean. What if he's not there? What if they're at the spa? Catherine asked, her voice trembling slightly. Then we wait, Beatrice said firmly. We sit in the lobby. We order tea, and we wait for Mr. and Mrs. Thorne to return from their relaxing afternoon. But my gut says they'll be back in the room. People like that, they want to enjoy every overpriced inch of the fantasy they've paid for. As they passed the iconic sign welcoming them to the Hamptons, Catherine felt a shift inside her. The fear was still there, a cold, hard knot in her stomach, but it was being overlaid by a chilling sense of purpose. She was no longer just the wounded pregnant wife. She was the CEO of this operation, the chief arbiter of her own fate. She smoothed down her dress, took a deep breath, and practiced the serene, confident smile she would need. She was about to step onto the stage of the biggest performance of her life, and she would not miss her cue. The unraveling thread had led her here to the edge of the Atlantic, and she was ready to pull it until the entire tapestry of lies came undone. The Seagate Resort and Spa was designed to look like it had been carved from the very dunes it occupied. Weathered grey cedar, vast expanses of glass and minimalist landscaping created an atmosphere of monastic, wildly expensive tranquility. Even in the stark light of a winter afternoon, it was beautiful. The beauty felt like an insult. Frank pulled the Mercedes S-Class smoothly under the portico. A valet, young and crisp in his uniform, rushed to open the door. Beatrice gave Catherine's hand a final firm squeeze. Showtime. Remember who you are. You own this place and everyone in it. Catherine stepped out of the car, pulling her cashmere wrap tighter around her shoulders. She was the very picture of refined elegance, her pregnancy only adding to her aura of serene maternal grace. No one would guess the tempest raging within her. The lobby was a cathedral of quiet luxury. A massive stone fireplace crackled at one end, and the air smelled of sea salt and burning birchwood. A single receptionist, a woman with impossibly perfect posture, stood behind a monolithic desk of reclaimed wood. Catherine glided towards the desk, Beatrice, a half-step behind her, a silent guard. "Good afternoon," Catherine said, her voice smooth as cream. "I'm here to surprise my husband, Marcus Thorne. I believe he's in one of your oceanfront villas." The receptionist, whose name tag read Anja, offered a polite professional smile. "Of course, Mrs. Thorne. It's a pleasure to have you with us. May I see some identification?" Catherine produced her driver's license. Anja's eyes flickered from the ID to Catherine's face, then to the name Thorne. The recognition was instant. Marcus Thorne was a name that commanded respect and discretion. "Everything appears to be in order," Anya said, her smile warming slightly. "Mr. Thorne is checked into Villa 7. I must say it's a wonderful surprise. He mentioned he was here for some intense solitary work. The lie repeated by a stranger was like a fresh stab wound." Solitary work. Catherine's smile didn't waver. "He works far too hard. I decided he needed a distraction. Could I trouble you for a key to the villa? I'd like to be waiting for him when he returns." This was the critical moment. A request for a second key without the primary guest present was a breach of protocol even for a spouse. Anya hesitated, her professional training warring with the desire to please a guest of Catherine's stature. Normally we would need to call the room to get Mr. Thorne's verbal confirmation. She began, her tone apologetic. Catherine leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a confidential, charming whisper. "Anya, I've just driven 2.5 hours from the city. I'm 7 months pregnant, and I'm desperate to see the look on his face when he walks in and finds me there. A phone call would spoil the entire thing. Surely we can keep this our little secret?" She placed a hand on her belly, a gesture that was both authentic and masterfully deployed. The combination of her name, her visible pregnancy, and her conspiratorial charm was too powerful to resist. Anja's professional resolve melted. "Of course, Mrs. Thorne," she said, her smile now genuine. "For you, we can make an exception. Let me program a key for you." As the receptionist worked, Beatrice let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Catherine was magnificent. She was playing the part of the adoring wife so perfectly, it was chilling. Keycard in hand, they walked away from the desk. "Villa 7 is at the far end of the property," Beatrice murmured. "It offers the most privacy." The most privacy to do what Catherine said, her voice a low, dangerous hum. The walk to the villa was the longest of Catherine's life. They followed a winding stone path that meandered through wind-swept seagrass. The air grew colder, sharper, and the sound of the crashing waves became a relentless roar. Each step was a drumbeat towards a detonation. Her earlier calm was evaporating, replaced by a raw, visceral dread. Her palms were sweating. Her heart hammered against her ribs. And then they were there. Villa 7. The name was etched on a simple, elegant plaque next to a heavy wooden door. It looked anonymous, innocuous, but behind it lay the truth. "Kath, are you ready?" Beatrice asked, her voice soft. Catherine looked at the door, then out at the grey, churning ocean. She thought of her unborn child, floating peacefully in its own silent world, oblivious to the tsunami about to hit theirs. That image gave her the final surge of strength she needed. "I am," she said. She turned to her sister. "Wait here. I have to do this alone." Beatrice hesitated, her protective instincts flaring. But she saw the look in Catherine's eyes. It was not a request, but a command. She nodded and stepped back. Catherine took a deep breath, held the keycard to the electronic lock, and waited for the small green light. It flashed. With a soft click, the lock disengaged. She pushed the door open. The villa's entryway led into a spacious living area, impeccably decorated in shades of sand and stone. A bottle of Bollinger champagne sat in a silver bucket on a low table, 2 flutes next to it. One was empty, the other half full, a faint lipstick smear on its rim. A man's jacket, Marcus's, was thrown carelessly over a chair, and from the bedroom just beyond, a partially open door, she could hear voices. A man's low laugh, Marcus's laugh, and a woman's higher, lighter laugh in response. The sound paralyzed her for a second. It was real. This was happening. Moving as if in a dream, she crept across the silent room. Her hand was steady as she pushed the bedroom door fully open. The scene before her was one of lazy post-coital intimacy. The king-sized bed was a tangle of white sheets. Marcus was propped up against the pillows, wearing nothing but a pair of boxer briefs, a tablet resting on his lap. And sitting next to him, her back to the door, was a woman. She was wearing a short, black silk robe, the one from the La Perla bag, Catherine realized with a sickening lurch. Her dark hair was tousled, and she was tracing a pattern on Marcus's chest with her finger. "You're sure no one will find out?" the woman's voice said. It was a voice Catherine vaguely recognized. "Your wife. She's not the suspicious type." Catherine Marcus scoffed, his tone dripping with a casual cruelty that shattered Catherine's heart into a million pieces. "She trusts me completely. She thinks I'm in San Francisco saving the world. She's a good woman, but a little naive. It's one of her charms." He was about to say more, but he glanced up, perhaps sensing a change in the light or a sudden chill in the air. His eyes met Catherine's. Time seemed to stop. The color drained from Marcus's face, replaced by a ghastly, mottled white. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The tablet slid from his lap and hit the floor with a dull thud. He looked like a man who had just seen his own executioner walk through the door. The woman, sensing his sudden terror, turned around. Her face was a mask of confusion, which then morphed into shocked recognition. Catherine's blood turned to ice. She knew this woman. It was Sloane Davenport, a fiercely ambitious rising star at a rival investment firm, Sterling Nash. She was known for her beauty, her brilliance, and her utter ruthlessness. This wasn't some random, meaningless affair. This was a liaison with a direct professional competitor. Sloane Davenport stared at Catherine, her mouth slightly agape. For a moment, the three of them were frozen in a tableau of shock, betrayal, and discovery. It was Catherine who broke the silence. Her voice was not the shriek of a hysterical wife. It was low, calm, and utterly devastating. It was the voice of ice and steel. "Don't get up on my account," she said, her eyes locked on her husband's. "It seems you're in the middle of some very intense solitary work." She used his own lie as the first twist of the knife. Marcus flinched, as if she had physically struck him. The game was over. The perfect life was a ruin. And Catherine was standing in the rubble, the undisputed, terrifying victor of this first brutal battle. The silence that followed Catherine's words was thick and suffocating. Sloane Davenport, recovering her composure with the speed of a seasoned predator, quickly clutched the silk robe tighter around herself, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. But Marcus remained frozen. his face a canvas of pure, unadulterated panic. The cocksure master of the universe was gone, replaced by a cornered animal. "Catherine," he finally stammered, his voice a hoarse whisper. What are you doing here? You should be in New York. The baby is fine." Catherine cut him off, her tone glacial. "He has a strong heart, unlike his father." She let her gaze drift disdainfully over Sloane, then back to Marcus. "I see the San Francisco Tech Summit was relocated, and that the dress code is more casual than I imagined. Is she part of the acquisition, Marcus, or just a disposable asset?" Each word was a precisely aimed dart. Sloane's face hardened. She stood up, a calculated move to assert some form of control. "I think I should go." "No," Catherine said, her voice dropping even lower, yet carrying an authority that rooted Sloane to the spot. "You stay. You were part of this business meeting. You should see it through to its conclusion." Catherine took a deliberate step into the room, her presence dominating the space. She looked around the suite at the champagne, the tangled sheets, the view of the desolate ocean. "It's a beautiful room. I remember it. We celebrated our first anniversary here. Did you tell her that, or does the personal history of the places you defile not matter?" Marcus finally found his legs, scrambling out of the bed and grabbing for his trousers. "Cat, please. Let's not do this here. Let's go somewhere and talk." "This isn't what it looks like." Catherine let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of any humor. "It isn't what it looks like, Marcus. Do you think I'm an idiot? Do you have any idea how insulting that sentence is? I am standing in a hotel room that you booked under your name, looking at you and your associate from a rival firm half naked in a bed that you paid for. It is exactly what it looks like. The only question is for how long." Sloane, seeing an opportunity to sow chaos, spoke up. "For about 6 months," she said coolly, looking directly at Catherine. "If you're going to have the details, you might as well have them all." It was a cruel, calculated blow, designed to shatter Catherine's composure. But Catherine didn't even flinch. She didn't grant Sloane a single glance. Her focus remained entirely on her husband, the true architect of this betrayal. 6 months, Catherine repeated softly, nodding to herself. "So this started just after we found out I was pregnant. That's a special kind of cruelty, Marcus. You deserve an award for it." She turned, her movement fluid and graceful, and walked back towards the door. She did not slam it. She did not run. She simply left, leaving a vacuum of shock and recrimination in her wake. Her retreat was more powerful than any screaming match could ever have been. Beatrice was waiting by the door, her face pale with anxiety. The moment she saw Catherine's expression, a mask of cold, terrifying calm, she knew. "Let's go," Catherine said, her voice flat. They walked back down the winding path, the roar of the ocean now sounding like a symphony of her rage. She remained silent until they were safely inside the climate-controlled silence of the Mercedes pulling away from the resort. Only then did her body begin to tremble, a violent, uncontrollable shudder. The adrenaline wore off, and the crushing weight of the betrayal slammed into her. She didn't cry out. The sob was a silent, convulsive thing that racked her entire body. Beatrice wrapped her arms around her, offering what little comfort she could. "He's dead to us," Beatrice whispered fiercely. "He's nothing. We'll call Dad. We'll get the lawyers. We will burn him to the ground." Catherine's trembling slowly subsided, replaced by an icy resolve. "Not yet." she said, her voice raspy. "First, I need to understand everything. This wasn't just a cheap affair, Bea. The woman was Sloane Davenport." Beatrice's eyes widened. "From Sterling Nash? Are you serious? Marcus is in the middle of that hostile takeover bid against them. What the hell is he thinking, sleeping with the enemy?" "I don't know," Catherine said. "But I'm going to find out." They drove back to the city in near silence. When she arrived at the empty penthouse, it felt alien, contaminated. She instructed Frank to take her to her father's residence on the Upper East Side. She couldn't bear to be in the home she had shared with Marcus. Just as she was walking into the grand old-world lobby of her father's building, her phone buzzed. It was Marcus. She ignored it. He called again, and again. On the 10th call, a text message appeared. "Cat, I know you hate me. I deserve it. But you have to listen. It is not what you think. Sloane is not my mistress. It's business. I am using her. Call me. It's vital." Catherine stared at the message, her heart pounding. I am using her. It was a desperate, self-serving excuse, a classic narcissist's gambit, reframe the betrayal as a brilliant, albeit ruthless, strategic move. He was trying to appeal to her pragmatism, to the part of her that understood the cutthroat world they lived in. She almost deleted it. But the mention of Sloane's name, the sheer audacity of the claim, planted a seed of doubt. What if in some twisted way he was telling a sliver of the truth? The affair being with a direct business rival was too specific, too reckless to be random. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Marcus. "She's been feeding me inside information on Sterling Nash, their defense strategy, their key shareholder weaknesses. This whole thing was a honey trap, but I was the one setting it. It was for the deal. For us. Please, Kat. I can explain." This was the twist. The sudden, nauseating turn. He was admitting to a different kind of crime. Not just adultery, but a deeply unethical, potentially illegal act of corporate espionage. He wasn't asking for forgiveness for the affair. He was trying to rebrand it as a sacrifice for their financial gain. He was trying to make her an accomplice. The revelation hit her with the force of a physical blow, leaving her breathless. Her husband was not just a cheat. He was a fool, playing a dangerous game, or a monster trying to justify his actions with greed. The line between personal betrayal and professional conspiracy had just been irrevocably blurred. She stood in the marble foyer of her father's building, the phone heavy in her hand. The situation had just become infinitely more complicated and infinitely more dangerous. This was no longer just a divorce. It was a war on two fronts. And Marcus, in his desperation, had just handed her a new and powerful weapon, the knowledge of his methods. He thought he was explaining his way out of trouble. He had no idea he was giving her the ammunition she would need to ensure his complete and utter destruction. Alistair Vance's apartment was the antithesis of the sleek, modern penthouse Catherine shared with Marcus. It was a fortress of old money, filled with dark wood, ancestral portraits, and the comforting scent of leather and aged paper. It was a space that radiated permanence and power. Alistair himself was cut from the same cloth. At 65, he was tall and silver-haired, with piercing blue eyes that missed nothing. He was a man who had weathered market crashes, hostile takeovers, and personal tragedies with the same stoic, unshakable resolve. When Catherine, flanked by a grim-faced Beatrice, told him the story, he listened without interruption, his face an unreadable mask. He didn't rage. He didn't offer platitudes. He simply absorbed the information, his mind processing it like a complex balance sheet. When she finished showing him the text messages from Marcus, he was silent for a full minute, his steepled fingers resting against his lips. "The man is a fool," he finally said, his voice a low rumble. "But a dangerous one. To attempt to justify infidelity as a business strategy. It's a level of moral bankruptcy that is frankly impressive." "He thinks it will work," Catherine said, her voice hollow. "He thinks I'm so invested in our wealth that I'll forgive the method. He's appealing to my avarice." "He is appealing to what he knows best," Alistair corrected gently. "He judges you by his own debased standards. He has profoundly underestimated you. That will be his undoing." He stood and walked to the vast window overlooking the city. "This is no longer a simple matter for a divorce attorney, Catherine. He has confessed in writing to corporate espionage. He has implicated himself in a plot that could not only destroy him, but also create significant blowback for our family, should it be handled incorrectly." "What do we do?" Beatrice asked, leaning forward. "We have him. Let's just release this to the board of his company." "Let's expose him." "No," Alistair said, turning from the window. "A public explosion is messy. It creates unpredictable shrapnel. We do not move until we control the entire board. We need to be surgical. First, we operate on the assumption that Marcus is lying, that this "I was using her" narrative is a fabrication to save his skin. But we also operate on the assumption that he might be telling the truth, which is in many ways worse. A man who would use an affair as a business tool is capable of any betrayal. Over the next 48 hours, the Vance residence became a war room. Alistair pulled in his top legal counsel and a private investigator, a former Mossad agent named Kobe, who specialized in discreet, high-stakes corporate intelligence. Catherine was not a passive participant. The shock had transformed into a cold, diamond-hard fury. She was an active strategist, her mind honed by a lifetime of observing her father proving to be sharp and ruthless. She provided Kobe with every detail she could remember about Marcus's recent behavior, names he had mentioned, trips he had taken, the new secretive patterns of his work. She gave him the login details to their shared cloud storage family accounts, anything that might hold a clue. "Marcus believes his greatest weapon is his intelligence," Catherine told the team, her voice steady. "His real weakness is his ego. He believes he is infallible, that he is the smartest man in any room. That's the vulnerability we will exploit." While Kobe began his digital deep dive, Catherine made a call. She dialed Gregory Shaw, Marcus's partner, and the COO of Thorn Capital. Gregory was the cautious, steady hand to Marcus's daring, often reckless genius. He was a numbers man, a risk analyst who had on more than one occasion privately expressed his concerns to Catherine about Marcus's aggressive strategies. "Gregory." "It's Catherine Thorn," she said, her voice calm and professional when he answered. "I need to speak with you urgently, in person and off the record. It concerns a significant undisclosed liability to the firm." The gravity in her tone was unmistakable. They agreed to meet the next morning at a quiet cafe far from the financial district. Meanwhile, Kobe hit pay dirt. Buried deep in a nested folder in a shared family cloud account, a folder labeled Vacation Plans that Catherine had forgotten existed, he found Marcus's digital treasure trove. It was a series of encrypted files. But Marcus, in his arrogance, had used a password related to a personal milestone. Kobe's team easily cross-referenced the stock ticker of the first company he had bankrupted. Inside were Marcus's notes on the Sterling Nash takeover. And it confirmed his text messages. He was using Sloan. The files contained detailed summaries of their meetings, listing information she had supposedly provided about Sterling Nash's defense strategies, their board's divisions, their largest institutional shareholders' pressure points. Marcus had meticulously documented his own conspiracy. He saw it as a record of his brilliance. Catherine saw it as a signed confession. But as Kobe dug deeper, another layer emerged. He cross-referenced the intel Sloane had supposedly provided with real-time market data and Sterling Nash's public filings, and he found a discrepancy, a terrifying one. He called Alistair and Catherine into the study. "There is a problem," he said, his Israeli accent precise. "The information from the woman Sloane is not entirely accurate. Some of it is good, just enough to build trust. But the most critical data points, the ones about shareholder positions and their debt covenants, they are subtly wrong. They are not mistakes. They are traps." A hush fell over the room. "Explain," Alistair commanded. "The data Sloane has given him," Kobe continued, pointing to his screen, "is designed to encourage Thorn Capital to launch its takeover bid at a specific price point, targeting specific shareholders. But according to our real analysis, this strategy will fail. It will trigger a poison pill defense we've uncovered in Sterling Nash's corporate bylaws that is far more potent than the one she described. It wouldn't just block the takeover. The blowback would leave Thorn Capital dangerously over-leveraged and vulnerable. The stock would plummet." Catherine felt a chill crawl up her spine. The second twist. The real twist. So she wasn't the honey trap, Catherine breathed. He was. She was playing him from the very beginning. Sloane Davenport wasn't a source. She was an assassin. She was feeding Marcus carefully crafted misinformation, leading him and his company towards a cliff, all while stroking his ego and letting him believe he was the master manipulator. She wasn't just sleeping with the enemy. She was gutting him from the inside out, using his own arrogance as her weapon. Alistair Vance allowed a slow, grim smile to spread across his face. "My God," he whispered. "It's brilliant. Utterly ruthless, but brilliant." He looked at his daughter, and his eyes were filled with a new kind of respect. "He handed you the gun to shoot him, and you've just discovered it's a cannon." Catherine now held all the cards. She had proof of Marcus's infidelity. She had his written confession of unethical corporate espionage. And now she had proof that his grand strategy was a catastrophic failure in the making a trap set by the very woman he thought he was controlling. She could not only destroy her husband personally, but could also save his company from his folly, positioning herself as the key player who uncovered the entire conspiracy. The next morning, when she walked into the cafe to meet Gregory Shaw, she was no longer just Catherine Thorne, the wronged wife. She was Catherine Vance, the inheritor of her father's strategic mind and ruthless execution. She was calm, prepared, and ready to make her first move in a game Marcus didn't even know she was playing. The power play had begun. The cafe was a discreet, anonymous place in Tribeca, the kind of establishment where powerful people went to have conversations they didn't want overheard. Gregory Shaw was already there, nursing an espresso, his face etched with worry. He was a man who lived by numbers and data, and the cryptic nature of Catherine's call had clearly unsettled him. "Catherine," he said, rising as she approached. "Thank you for meeting me. Is everything all right? You mentioned a liability." "Hello, Gregory," she said, her voice even. She didn't sit down immediately. "The liability isn't a what, it's a who. It's Marcus." Gregory's expression tightened. "I don't follow. Is this about the Sterling Nash deal? I'll admit his strategy is more aggressive than I'd like, but his projections are solid. His projections, Catherine said, finally taking a seat, are based on a fantasy. A fantasy fed to him by his mistress, Sloane Davenport. The name landed on the table between them, with the force of a physical object. Gregory visibly paled. Sloane Davenport. From Sterling Nash. That's impossible. It's professional suicide. For Marcus, yes. Catherine agreed. For her, it's the coup of a lifetime. For the next 20 minutes, Catherine laid it all out. She didn't speak with the emotion of a betrayed wife, but with the cold precision of a CEO delivering a devastating report. She told him about the affair, showing him a single damning piece of evidence on her phone, a time-stamped photo she had instructed Kobe to retrieve from the Seagate security footage, showing Marcus and Sloane entering the elevator together. Then she moved to the business. She explained the honey trap, the manipulated data, the poison pill. She detailed how Sloane was leading Marcus, and by extension the entire firm, into a perfectly designed ambush that would cripple them. She didn't show him Marcus's confessional notes. That was her trump card to be held in reserve. She presented only the hard data. Kobe had compiled the analysis that proved Sloane's information was a lie. Gregory listened, his initial shock turning to dawning horror, and then to cold fury. He was a man who had dedicated his life to building Thorn Capital alongside Marcus, mitigating his partner's risks. To learn that Marcus had exposed them all, not just through recklessness, but through a toxic cocktail of arrogance and infidelity, was the ultimate betrayal. The man is a pyromaniac who thinks he can control fire. Gregory said, his voice shaking with rage. He's going to burn the entire firm to the ground for an ego trip. Yes, Catherine said simply. Unless we stop him. The board meeting to approve the final phase of the takeover is on Friday. We have 2 days. What do you want? Gregory asked, his eyes locking on hers. He was seeing her now not as the boss's wife, but as a player. A formidable one. I want what you want, Gregory. To protect the firm. To excise the cancer. I want you to rally the board members you trust. My father is already making calls to the institutional investors his family has relationships with. When Marcus walks into that boardroom on Friday, he will not be met with applause. He will be met with a unified front. And you? Gregory asked. What is your price? My price, Catherine said. Her voice dropping is his complete removal from the company he founded. His shares will be bought out at a valuation that reflects the damage he has caused. And my divorce will be quiet, swift, and uncontested. He will walk away with enough to live on, but he will be stripped of his power, his reputation, and his legacy. He will be a ghost on Wall Street. It was a ruthless, elegant, and total victory she was outlining. Gregory stared at her for a long moment, then gave a single, sharp nod. Friday. We'll be ready. The next 2 days were a blur of encrypted calls, discreet meetings, and strategic maneuvers. Alistair Vance worked his magic behind the scenes, his influence turning the tide of investor sentiment. Gregory Shaw, armed with Catherine's irrefutable proof of the flawed data, secured the loyalty of the other board members. They were all sharks, and they could smell the blood in the water, Marcus's blood. On Friday morning, Marcus Thorn walked into the boardroom on the 50th floor of the Thorn Capital building, feeling triumphant. He believed he was on the verge of the greatest victory of his career. He had tried calling Catherine dozens of times, but she hadn't answered. He assumed she was angry, hysterical, but would eventually come around once she saw the billions his brilliant, if unorthodox, methods had secured for their family. He smiled as he took his seat at the head of the long, polished table. "Good morning, everyone. A historic day." No one smiled back. The atmosphere in the room was arctic. Gregory Shaw sat to his right, his face like stone. The other board members stared at him with cold, appraising eyes. "Before we begin," Marcus Gregory said, his voice dangerously calm, "we have another matter to discuss. An independent risk assessment of the Sterling Nash data has revealed some alarming inconsistencies." Marcus's smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" "My source is ironclad." "Is your source Sloane Davenport?" Gregory asked flatly. The color drained from Marcus's face. He looked around the room at the hostile faces and realized too late that this was not a meeting. It was an ambush, an execution. And then the boardroom doors opened. Catherine walked in. She was flanked by her father and two lawyers. She was composed, powerful, her pregnancy a symbol not of vulnerability, but of the future, a future that would not include him. She took a seat at the opposite end of the table, directly in his line of sight. "Catherine," he choked out. "What is this?" "This, Marcus," she said. Her voice, ringing with clarity in the silent room, is called due diligence. Something you abandoned 6 months ago. One of her lawyers slid a folder down the table to him. It contained the photo from the hotel, the analysis of Sloane's flawed data, and on top printouts of his own text messages to Catherine. His own words condemning him. "I am using her." He stared at the documents, his empire crumbling before his eyes. He had been outmaneuvered, out-thought, and utterly destroyed. "The board has held an emergency session," Gregory announced into the void. "We have voted unanimously. We are tabling the Sterling Nash bid indefinitely pending an internal investigation into your conduct, and we are asking for your immediate resignation as CEO and chairman." Marcus looked from the board members to Alistair Vance, whose expression was one of cool satisfaction. Then his gaze fell on his wife. Her face held no pity, no lingering affection. It held only the serene calm of a victor. He was finished. He knew it. Sloane Davenport's scheme had been exposed, but not by him. His affair had been uncovered. His professional judgment was shattered. He had lost everything, all because he had made the fatal mistake of underestimating the woman who carried his child. Catherine stood up, her part in the proceedings complete. She didn't need to say another word. As she walked out of the boardroom, she didn't look back. She was walking towards her new life, one she would forge herself from the ashes of her husband's ruin. She was no longer just a Vance by name. She had become the embodiment of its power. Her child would be born into a legacy not of lies, but of strength secured by a mother who had faced the ultimate betrayal and emerged the queen of the board. In the end, it wasn't the affair that brought down Marcus Thorne's empire. It was his hubris. He believed he could compartmentalize his life, keeping his betrayals neatly separated from his business. But lies are never contained. They bleed. They infect everything they touch. Catherine's journey from a trusting pregnant wife to a cold, calculating strategist shows us that the deepest wounds can forge the strongest armor. She didn't just survive. She conquered. By refusing to be a victim, she rewrote her own story and the future of everyone around her. What do you think? Was Catherine's revenge justified, or was it too ruthless? Could you have done what she did? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.